The Agnostic Reformation. Let us confess to our unknowingness.
The Agnostic Reformation. 95 Theses on Indeterminate Unknowingness. With ideas from Huxley, Darrow, Russell, McCabe, Holbach, and Ingersoll. Foreword. When Spencer Tracy, playing Clarence Darrow in the movie Inherit the Wind, takes the Bible in one hand and On Origin of Species in the other, and clasps them together side by side to illustrate how science and religion can work together, one is led to assume that Darrow was indeed a theist evolutionist. But was he? Hollywood's portrayal of him in this classic film is obviously suspect. Instead of supporting theism, Darrow's own writings clearly show his strong support for agnosticism, literally, not knowing. This philosophical position, the argument that one cannot know ultimate or metaphysical truths, or even whether there are any, fits in line with the teachings of Socrates, Hume, Darwin, Einstein, and many other philosophers and scientists today. Science is inherently agnostic. As a discipline, it tends to only investigate those claims that can, in theory, be tested and proven. Indeed, Karl Popper, a well-known philosopher and historian of science, has stressed that for something to be of scientific merit, it must be potentially falsifiable. In other words, science doesn't work by proving itself right, but rather by demonstrating where, when, and how it can potentially be wrong. In this way, it can actually correct prior assumptions and make further testable hypotheses, which can either withstand rational scrutiny or be shown to be lacking in sufficient evidence. When a metaphysical, above or beyond the empirical world claim is made, however, there is usually no way to test it and prove beyond a reasonable doubt that such a thing actually exists. Believing it to be so is insufficient in the realm of science. There have been many attempts to prove the existence of God outside of merely quoting the authority of a supposed revealed scripture such as the Bible or the Quran. Thomas Aquinas, for instance, looked at nature for signs of God, and everywhere he looked, he saw him. As he opined, how can there be design in nature without a designer? Obviously, reasoned Aquinas, God must therefore exist. But for all his yeomanly efforts, as outlined in his 5 arguments for the existence of God, ranging from the cosmological to the teleological, none of the proofs held, as David Hume so brilliantly illustrated. Interpreting the magnificence of a flower as evidence of a higher being falls short of what is demanded as proof in science. While one might see design in nature, another can witness a maelstrom of haphazard organic parts, only temporarily resisting chaos, and all too soon succumbing to entropic death. Naturally, a question arises. Does the theory of evolution necessitate an agnostic worldview? Or can one believe in theism and still be an evolutionist such as Kenneth Miller, author of Finding Darwin's God? Yes, one can personally believe in any religious idea one wishes to, and even connect such to a scientific paradigm. But saying this also means that one could attach any sort of nonsense to science and try to suggest that they are not in conflict. I could, for instance, say that believing in Gumby and Pokey as divine avatars, famous animated claymation figures popular on American television, doesn't conflict with Darwin's idea of natural selection. But making such a banal statement doesn't then justify claiming that one's chosen religious belief is a legitimate scientific position that warrants equal treatment in a biology course. As Carl Sagan rightly said, extraordinary claims demand extraordinary proof. And since religion in general is either unwilling or unable to provide such proofs to the scientific community, it is perhaps inevitable that the only honest position one can hold and still be true to the spirit of science is, in fact, agnosticism. Clarence Darrow, even though not trained as a scientist but rather as a lawyer, realized this truth early on and became a tireless champion of allowing the unknowing postulate in science to permeate into one's daily life, as he himself so wittingly observed. An agnostic is a doubter. The word is generally applied to those who doubt the verity of accepted religious creeds of faiths. Everyone is an agnostic as to the beliefs or creeds they do not accept. Catholics are agnostic to the Protestant creeds, and the Protestants are agnostic to the Catholic creed. Anyone who thinks is an agnostic about something, otherwise he must believe that he is possessed of all knowledge. Darrow represents a long line of agnostics and skeptics, dating back to before the Carvaka school of empiricism in ancient India. The modern usage of the term agnostic or agnosticism was apparently first coined by Thomas Henry Huxley in 1869 in an ironic twist at a gathering of the Metaphysical Society in London, England. Huxley took the more common Greek term gnosis and gnostic to know, and simply placed an A before it, indicating not knowing or unknowing. The term agnostic is often used in contradistinction to the more volatile word atheist, since the latter suggests a more certain form of knowledge that a theistic God does not exist. As you will see going through the 95 theses in this book, the agnostic is one who is willing to change their mind provided that there is sufficient evidence. The agnostic doesn't deny metaphysics a priori, but simply points out that there are no compelling reasons to believe in transcendental forces if the evidence for such is insufficient. The agnostic is in an inductive posture towards knowledge and, as such, is always open to new avenues of information that may upend previously held convictions. It is for this reason, one's acceptance of uncertainty, that fundamentalist thinkers, particularly of religion, are threatened by agnosticism, since it holds doubt and skepticism are better pathways for acquiring an accurate assessment of how the world works than relying on unmovable faith and recalcitrant belief. Professor Andrea Diem, Ph.D. Chair, Philosophy Department, Mount San Antonio College. Thomas Henry Huxley. 1. If anyone had preferred this request to me, I should have replied that if he referred to agnostics, they have no creed, and by the nature of the case cannot have any agnosticism. In fact, is not a creed, but a method, the essence of which lies in the rigorous application of a single principle. That principle is of great antiquity. It is as old as Socrates, as old as the writer who said, "Try all things, hold fast by that which is good." It is the foundation of the Reformation, which simply illustrated the axiom that every man should be able to give a reason for the faith that is in him. It is the great principle of Descartes. It is the fundamental axiom of modern science. Positively, the principle may be expressed. In matters of the intellect, follow your reason as far as it will take you, without regard to any other consideration. And negatively, in matters of the intellect, do not pretend that conclusions are certain which are not demonstrated or demonstrable. That I take to be the agnostic faith, which if a man keep whole and undefiled, he shall not be ashamed to look the universe in the face, whatever the future may have in store for him. 2. The results of the working out of the agnostic principle will vary according to individual knowledge and capacity, and according to the general condition of science. That which is unproven today may be proven by the help of new discoveries tomorrow. The only negative fixed points will be those negations which flow from the demonstrable limitation of our faculties, and the only obligation accepted is to have the mind always open to conviction. Agnostics who never fail in carrying out their principles are, I am afraid, as rare as other people of whom the same consistency can be truthfully predicated. But if you were to meet with such a phoenix and to tell him that you had discovered that 2 and 2 make 5, he would patiently ask you to state your reasons for that conviction and express his readiness to agree with you if he found them satisfactory. The apostolic injunction to suffer fools gladly should be the rule of life of a true agnostic. I'm deeply conscious how far I myself fall short of this ideal, but it is my personal conception of what agnostics ought to be. 3. Moreover, speaking for myself, and without impugning the right of any other person to use the term in another sense, I further say that agnosticism is not properly described as a negative creed, nor indeed as a creed of any kind, except in so far as it expresses absolute faith in the validity of a principle, which is as much ethical as intellectual. This principle may be stated in various ways, but they all amount to this: that it is wrong for a man to say that he is certain of the objective truth of any proposition unless he can produce evidence which logically justifies that certainty. This is what agnosticism asserts, and in my opinion, it is all that is essential to agnosticism. That which agnostics deny and repudiate as immoral is the contrary doctrine, that there are propositions which men ought to believe without logically satisfactory evidence, and that reprobation ought to attach to the profession of disbelief in such inadequately supported propositions. The justification of the agnostic principle lies in the success which follows upon its application, whether in the field of natural or in that of civil history, and in the fact that, so far as these topics are concerned, no sane man thinks of denying its validity. 4. Still speaking for myself, I add that though agnosticism is not and cannot be a creed, except insofar as its general principle is concerned, yet that the application of that principle results in the denial of, or the suspension of judgment concerning, a number of propositions respecting which our contemporary ecclesiastical Gnostics profess entire certainty. And in so far as these ecclesiastical persons can be justified in their old, established custom, which many nowadays think more honored in the breach than the observance, of using opprobrious names to those who differ from them, I fully admit their right to call me and those who think with me infidels. All I have ventured to urge is that they must not expect us to speak of ourselves by that title. 5. I do not very much care to speak of anything as unknowable. 82. What I am sure about is that there are many topics about which I know nothing, and which, so far as I can see, are out of reach of my faculties. But whether these things are knowable by anyone else is exactly one of those matters which is beyond my knowledge, though I may have a tolerably strong opinion as to the probabilities of the case relatively to myself. I am quite sure that the region of uncertainty, the nebulous country in which words play the part of realities, is far more extensive than I could wish materialism and idealism, theism and atheism, the doctrine of the soul and its mortality or immortality appear in the history of philosophy like the shades of Scandinavian heroes eternally slaying one another and eternally coming to life again in a metaphysical Niflheim. It is getting on for 25 centuries at least since mankind began seriously to give their minds to these topics. Generation after generation, philosophy has been doomed to roll the stone uphill, and just as all the world swore it was at the top, down it has rolled to the bottom again. All this is written in innumerable books, and he who will toil through them will discover that the stone is just where it was when the work began. Hume saw this. Kant saw it. Since their time, more and more eyes have been cleansed of the films which prevented them from seeing it. Until now, the weight and number of those who refuse to be the prey of verbal mystifications has begun to tell in practical life. 6. It was inevitable that a conflict should arise between agnosticism and theology, or rather, I ought to say, between agnosticism and ecclesiasticism. For theology, the science, is one thing, and ecclesiasticism, the championship of a foregone conclusion 83, as to the truth of a particular form of theology, is another. With scientific theology, agnosticism has no quarrel. On the contrary, the agnostic, knowing too well the influence of prejudice and idiosyncrasy, even on those who desire most earnestly to be impartial, can wish for nothing more urgently than that the scientific theologian should not only be at perfect liberty to thresh out the matter in his own fashion, but that he should, if he can, find flaws in the agnostic position. And even if demonstration is not to be had, that he should put, in their full force, the grounds of the conclusions he thinks probable. The scientific theologian admits the agnostic principle, however widely his results may differ from those reached by the majority of agnostics. 7. But as between agnosticism and ecclesiasticism, or as our neighbors across the channel call it, clericalism, there can be neither peace nor truce. The cleric asserts that it is morally wrong not to believe certain propositions, whatever the results of a strict scientific investigation of the evidence of these propositions. He tells us that religious error is in itself of an immoral nature. 84. He declares that he has prejudged certain conclusions and looks upon those who show cause for arrest of judgment as emissaries of Satan. It necessarily follows that for him the attainment of faith, not the ascertainment of truth, is the highest aim of mental life. And on careful analysis of the nature of this faith, it will too often be found to be not the mystic process of unity with the divine, understood by the religious enthusiast, but that which the candid simplicity of a Sunday scholar once defined it to be: faith, said this unconscious plagiarist of Tertullian, is the power of saying you believe things which are incredible. 8. Now I, and many other agnostics, believe that faith in this sense is an abomination, and though we do not indulge in the luxury of self-righteousness so far as to call those who are not of our way of thinking hard names, we do not feel that the disagreement between ourselves and those who hold this doctrine is even more moral than intellectual. It is desirable there should be an end of any mistakes on this topic. If our clerical opponents were clearly aware of the real state of the case, there would be an end of the curious delusion, which often appears between the lines of their writings, that those whom they are so fond of calling infidels are people who not only ought to be, but in their hearts are ashamed of themselves. It would be discourteous to do more than hint the antipodal opposition of this pleasant dream of theirs to facts. 9. I trust that I have now made amends for any ambiguity or want of fullness in my previous exposition of that which I hold to be the essence of the agnostic doctrine henceforward. I might hope to hear no more of the assertion that we are necessarily materialists, idealists, atheists, theists, or any other ists. If experience had led me to think that the proved falsity of a statement was any guarantee against its repetition. And those who appreciate the nature of our position will see at once that when ecclesiasticism declares that we ought to believe this, that, and the other, and are very wicked if we don't, it is impossible for us to give any answer but this: we have not the slightest objection to believe anything you like if you will give us good grounds for belief. But if you cannot, we must respectfully refuse, even if that refusal should wreck mortality and ensure our own damnation several times over. We are quite content to leave that to the decision of the future. The course of the past has impressed us with the firm conviction that no good ever comes of falsehood, and we feel warranted in refusing even to experiment in that direction. 10. Ecclesiasticism says, the demonology of the Gospels is an essential part of that account of that spiritual world, the truth of which it declares to be certified by Jesus. Agnosticism, me, Judas, says, there is no good evidence of the existence of a demoniac spiritual world, and much reason for doubting it. 11. In agnosticism, a rejoinder, I have referred to the difficulties under which those professors of the science of theology, whose tenure of their posts depends on the results of their investigations, must labor. And, in a note, I add, imagine that all our chairs of astronomy had been founded in the 14th century and that their incumbents were bound to sign Ptolemaic articles in that case, with every respect for the efforts of persons thus hampered to attain and expound the truth. I think men of common sense would go elsewhere to learn astronomy. Clarence Darrow. 12. Primitive and even civilized people have grown so accustomed to believing in miracles that they often attribute the simplest manifestations of nature to agencies of which they know nothing. They do this when the belief is utterly inconsistent with knowledge and logic. They believe in old miracles and new ones. Preachers pray for rain, knowing full well that no such prayer was ever answered. When a politician is sick, they pray for God to cure him, and the politician almost invariably dies. The modern clergyman who prays for rain and for the health of the politician is no more intelligent in this matter than the primitive man who saw a separate miracle in the rising and setting of the sun, in the birth of an individual, in the growth of a plant, in the stroke of lightning, in the flood, in every manifestation of nature and life. 13. As to prophecies, intelligent writers gave them up long ago. In all prophecies, facts are made to suit the prophecy, or the prophecy was made after the facts, or the events have no relation to the prophecy. Weird and strange and unreasonable interpretations are used to explain simple statements that a prophecy may be claimed. 14. Can any rational person believe that the Bible is anything but a human document? We now know pretty well where the various books came from, and about when they were written. We know that they were written by human beings who had no knowledge of science, little knowledge of life, and were influenced by the barbarous morality of primitive times, and were grossly ignorant of most things that men know today. For instance, Genesis says that God made the earth, and he made the sun to light the day and the moon to light the night, and in one clause disposes of the stars by saying that he made the stars also. This was plainly written by someone who had no conception of the stars. 15. The origin of the human race is not as blind a subject as it once was. Let alone God creating Adam out of hand from the dust of the earth, does anyone believe that Eve was made from Adam's rib, that the snake walked and spoke in the Garden of Eden, that he tempted Eve to persuade Adam to eat an apple, and that it is on that account that the whole human race was doomed to hell, that for 4,000 years there was no chance for any human to be saved, though none of them had anything whatever to do with the temptation, and that finally men were saved only through God's Son dying for them, and that unless human beings believed this silly, impossible, and wicked story, they were doomed to hell. Can anyone with intelligence really believe that a child born today should be doomed because the snake tempted Eve and Eve tempted Adam? To believe that is not God worship, it is devil worship. 16. Can anyone call this scheme of creation and damnation moral? It defies every principle of morality, as man conceives morality. Can anyone believe today that the whole world was destroyed by flood, save only Noah and his family and a male and female of each species of animal that entered the ark? There are almost 1 million species of insects alone. How did Noah match these up and make sure of getting male and female to reproduce life in the world after the flood had spent its force? And why should all the lower animals have been destroyed? Were they included in the sinning of man? This is a story which could not beguile a fairly bright child of 5 years of age today. 17. The reasons for agnosticism and skepticism are abundant and compelling. Fantastic and foolish and impossible consequences are freely claimed for the belief in religion. All the civilization of any period is put down as a result of religion. All the cruelty and error and ignorance of the period has no relation to religion. The truth is that the origin of what we call civilization is not due to religion, but to skepticism. So long as men accepted miracles without question, so long as they believed in original sin and the road to salvation, so long as they believed in a hell where man would be kept for eternity on account of Eve, there was no reason whatever for civilization. Life was short and eternity was long, and the business of life was preparation for eternity. 18. When every event was a miracle, when there was no order or system or law, there was no occasion for studying any subject or being interested in anything excepting a religion which took care of the soul. As man doubted the primitive conceptions about religion and no longer accepted the literal, miraculous teachings of ancient books, he set himself to understand nature. We no longer cure disease by casting out devils. Since that time, men have studied the human body, have built hospitals and treated illness in a scientific way. Science is responsible for the building of railroads and bridges, of steamships, of telegraph lines, of cities, towns, large buildings and small plumbing and sanitation, of the food supply, and the countless thousands of useful things that we now deem necessary to life. Without skepticism and doubt, none of these things could have been given to the world. 19. The fear of God is not the beginning of wisdom. The fear of God is the death of wisdom. Skepticism and doubt lead to study and investigation is the beginning of wisdom. 20. The modern world is the child of doubt and inquiry, as the ancient world was the child of fear and faith. 21. An agnostic is a doubter. The word is generally applied to those who doubt the verity of accepted religious creeds of faiths. Everyone is an agnostic as to the beliefs or creeds they do not accept. Catholics are agnostic to the Protestant creeds, and the Protestants are agnostic to the Catholic creed. Anyone who thinks is an agnostic about something, otherwise he must believe that he is possessed of all knowledge, and the proper place for such a person is in the madhouse or the home for the feeble-minded. In a popular way, in the Western world, an agnostic is one who doubts or disbelieves the main tenets of the Christian faith. 22. I am an agnostic as to the question of God. I think that it is impossible for the human mind to believe in an object or thing unless it can form a mental picture of such object or thing. 23. Man has always speculated upon the origin of the universe, including himself. I feel with Herbert Spencer that whether the universe had an origin, and, if it had, what the origin is will never be known by man. 24. To say that God made the universe gives us no explanation of the beginnings of things. If we are told that God made the universe, the question immediately arises, who made God? Did he always exist, or was there some power back of that? Did he create matter out of nothing, or is his existence coextensive with matter? The problem is still there. What is the origin of it all? If, on the other hand, one says that the universe was not made by God, that it always existed, he has the same difficulty to confront. To say that the universe was here last year, or millions of years ago, does not explain its origin. This is still a mystery. As to the question of the origin of things, man can only wonder and doubt and guess. 25. As to the existence of the soul, all people may either believe or disbelieve. Everyone knows the origin of the human being. They know that it came from a single cell in the body of the mother, and that the cell was 1 out of 10,000 in the mother's body. Before gestation, the cell must have been fertilized by a spermatozoon from the body of the father. This was 1 out of perhaps 1 billion spermatozoa that was the capacity of the father. When the cell is fertilized, a chemical process begins. The cell divides and multiplies and increases into millions of cells, and finally a child is born. Cells die and are born during the life of the individual until they finally drop apart, and this is death. 26. If there is a soul, what is it and where did it come from and where does it go? Can anyone who is guided by his reason possibly imagine a soul independent of a body, or the place of its residence, or the character of it, or anything concerning it? If man is justified in any belief or disbelief on any subject, he is warranted in the disbelief in a soul. Not one scrap of evidence exists to prove any such impossible thing. 27. The truth is that the origin of what we call civilization is not due to religion but to skepticism. 28. Why am I an agnostic? Because I don't believe some of the things that other people say they believe. 29. I am asked to say why I am an agnostic. I am an agnostic because I trust my reason. It may not be the greatest that ever existed. I'm inclined to admit that it isn't, but it is the best I have. That is a mighty sight, better than some other people's at that. I am an agnostic because no man living can form any picture of any God, and you can't believe in an object unless you can form a picture of it. You may believe in the force, but not in the object. 30. If there is any God in the universe, I don't know it. Some people say they know it instinctively. Well, the errors and foolish things that men have known instinctively are so many we can't talk about them. 31. As a rule, the less a person knows, the surer he is. 32. Our conceptions of things root back, and that, of course, is the reason for our crude religions, our crude laws, our crude ideas, and our exalted opinion of the human race. 33. Whatever our faith, we mainly live in the present, in the here and now. Those who hold the view that man is mortal are never troubled by metaphysical problems. At the end of the day's labor, we are glad to lose our consciousness in sleep. And intellectually, at least, we look forward to the long rest from the stresses and storms that are always incidental to existence. 34. When we fully understand the brevity of life, its fleeting joys and unavoidable pains, when we accept the facts that all men and women are approaching an inevitable doom, the consciousness of it should make us more kindly and considerate of each other. This feeling should make men and women use their best efforts to help their fellow travelers on the road, to make the path brighter and easier as we journey on. It should bring a closer kinship, a better understanding, and a deeper sympathy for the wayfarers who must live a common life and die a common death. Bertrand Russell. 35. An agnostic thinks it impossible to know the truth in matters such as God and the future life with which Christianity and other religions are concerned, or if not impossible, at least impossible at the present time. 36. An atheist, like a Christian, holds that we can know whether or not there is a God. The Christian holds that we can know there is a God. The atheist that we can know there is not. The agnostic suspends judgment, saying that there are not sufficient grounds either for affirmation or for denial. At the same time, an agnostic may hold that the existence of God, though not impossible, is very improbable. He may even hold it so improbable that it is not worth considering in practice. In that case, he is not far removed from atheism. His attitude may be that which a careful philosopher would have towards the gods of ancient Greece. 37. If I were asked to prove that Zeus and Poseidon and Hera and the rest of the Olympians do not exist, I should be at a loss to find conclusive arguments. An agnostic may think the Christian God as improbable as the Olympians. In that case, he is, for practical purposes, at one with the atheists. 38. An agnostic does not accept any authority in the sense in which religious people do. He holds that a man should think out questions of conduct for himself. 39. Of course, he will seek to profit by the wisdom of others, but he will have to select for himself the people he is to consider wise, and he will not regard even what they say as unquestionable. 40. The agnostic is not quite so certain as some Christians are as to what is good and what is evil. He does not hold, as most Christians in the past held, that people who disagree with the government on abstruse points of theology ought to suffer a painful death. He is against persecution and rather chary of moral condemnation. 41. An agnostic regards the Bible exactly as enlightened clerics regard it. He does not think that it is divinely inspired. He thinks its early history legendary, and no more exactly true than that in Homer. He thinks its moral teaching sometimes good, but sometimes very bad. 42. Since an agnostic does not believe in God, he cannot think that Jesus was God. Most agnostics admire the life and moral teachings of Jesus as told in the Gospels, but not necessarily more than those of certain other men. Some would place him on a level with Buddha, some with Socrates, and some with Abraham Lincoln. Nor do they think that what he said is not open to question, since they do not accept any authority as absolute. 43. They regard the virgin birth as a doctrine taken over from pagan mythology, where such births were not uncommon. Zoroaster was said to have been born of a virgin. Ishtar, the Babylonian goddess, is called the Holy Virgin. They cannot give credence to it or to the doctrine of the Trinity, since neither is possible without belief in God. 44. Many agnostics, including myself, are quite as doubtful of the body as they are of the soul, but this is a long story taking one into difficult metaphysics. Mind and matter alike, I should say, are only convenient symbols in discourse, not actually existing things. 45. The question whether people survive death is one as to which evidence is possible. Psychical research and spiritualism are thought by many to supply such evidence. An agnostic, as such, does not take a view about survival unless he thinks that there is evidence one way or the other. For my part, I do not think there is any good reason to believe that we survive death, but I am open to conviction if adequate evidence should appear. 46. Heaven and hell are a different matter. Belief in hell is bound up with the belief that the vindictive punishment of sin is a good thing, quite independently of any reformative or deterrent effect that it may have. Hardly an agnostic believes this. As for heaven, there might conceivably someday be evidence of its existence through spiritualism, but most agnostics do not think that there is such evidence, and therefore do not believe in heaven. 47. I observe that a very large portion of the human race does not believe in God and suffers no visible punishment in consequence. And if there were a God, I think it very unlikely that he would have such an uneasy vanity as to be offended by those who doubt his existence. 48. Agnostics do not think that there is any evidence of miracles in the sense of happenings contrary to natural law. We know that faith healing occurs and is in no sense miraculous. 49. At Lourdes, certain diseases can be cured and others cannot. Those that can be cured at Lourdes can probably be cured by any doctor in whom the patient has faith. As for the records of other miracles, such as Joshua commanding the sun to stand still, the agnostic dismisses them as legends and points to the fact that all religions are plentifully supplied with such legends. There is just as much miraculous evidence for the Greek gods in Homer as for the Christian God in the Bible. 50. In our day, a new dogmatic religion, namely communism, has arisen. To this, as to other systems of dogma, the agnostic is opposed. The persecuting character of present-day communism is exactly like the persecuting character of Christianity in earlier centuries. 51. Insofar as Christianity has become less persecuting, this is mainly due to the work of freethinkers who have made dogmatists rather less dogmatic. If they were as dogmatic now as in former times, they would still think it right to burn heretics at the stake. The spirit of tolerance which some modern Christians regard as essentially Christian is, in fact, a product of the temper which allows doubt and is suspicious of absolute certainties. I think that anybody who surveys past history in an impartial manner will be driven to the conclusion that religion has caused more suffering than it has prevented. 52. Agnostics, as such, have no distinctive views about sexual morality, but most of them would admit that there are valid arguments against the unbridled indulgence of sexual desires. They would derive these arguments, however, from terrestrial sources and not from supposed divine commands. 53. No sensible man, however agnostic, has faith in reason alone. 54. Reason is concerned with matters of fact, some observed, some inferred. The question whether there is a future life and the question whether there is a God concern matters of fact, and the agnostic will hold that they should be investigated in the same way as the question, will there be an eclipse of the moon tomorrow? But matters of fact alone are not sufficient to determine action, since they do not tell us what ends we ought to pursue. In the realm of ends, we need something other than reason. The agnostic will find his ends in his own heart and not in an external command. Joseph McCabe. 55. The theist and the scientist are rival interpreters of nature. The one retreats as the other advances. 56. The rationalist case needs no straining of evidence and always gains by the severest self-criticism. 57. Evolution throws a wonderful light on all the struggles, eccentricities, tortuous developments of the human conscience in the past. It is the only theory of morals that does, and evolution throws just as much light on the ethical and social struggle today, and it is the only theory that does. What a strange age ours is from the religious point of view. What a hopeless age from the philosopher's point of view. Yet it is a very good age, the best that ever was. No evolutionist is a pessimist. 58. If a single one of these gentlemen is correct, if a believer of any type is right, the essential truth for man, the real drama of life, in comparison with which the secular story of the race is a puppet show and the unfolding of the universe is a triviality, is the dialogue of the immortal soul and the eternal God. Yet it seems that there is nothing in the world so hard to discover as this. The theory refutes itself. 59. Today we know not only that there is a terrible amount of disorder in the heavens, great catastrophes or conflagrations occur frequently, but evolution gives us a perfectly natural explanation of such order as there is. No distinguished astronomer now traces the finger of God in the heavens, and astronomers ought to know best. 60. I took a sheet of paper, divided it into debt and credit columns on the arguments for and against God and immortality. On Christmas Eve, I wrote bankrupt at the foot, and it was on Christmas morning, 1895, after I had celebrated 3 masses, while the bells of the parish church were ringing out the Christmas message of peace, that with great pain I found myself far out from the familiar land, homeless, aimlessly drifting. But the bells were right after all. From that hour on, I have been wholly free from the nightmare of doubt that had lain on me for 10 years. 61. I am what is called a feminist. 30 years ago, I left a monastery and began a sane human existence. Within 2 or 3 years, I find I was defending the rights of women. Baron de Holbach. 62. If we go back to the beginnings of things, we shall always find that ignorance and fear created the gods, that imagination, rapture, and deception embellish them, that weakness worships them, that custom spares them, and that tyranny favors them in order to profit from the blindness of men. 63. The universe, that vast assemblage of everything that exists, presents only matter and motion. The whole offers to our contemplation nothing but an immense and uninterrupted succession of causes and effects. 64. What indeed is an atheist? He is one who destroys delusions which are harmful to humanity in order to lead men back to nature, to reality, to reason. He is a thinker who, having reflected on the nature of matter, its energy, properties, and ways of acting, has no need of idealized powers or imaginary intelligences to explain the phenomena of the universe and the operations of nature. 65. All religions are ancient monuments to superstition, ignorance, and ferocity. 66. Men always fool themselves when they give up experience for systems born of the imagination. Man is the work of nature. He exists in nature. He is subject to its laws. He cannot break free. He cannot leave even in thought. It is in vain that his spirit wants to soar beyond the bounds of the visible world. He is always forced to return. 67. Nature, you say, is totally inexplicable without a God. That is to say, to explain what you understand very little, you have need of a cause which you understand not at all. 68. People have suffered and become insane for centuries by the thought of eternal punishment after death. Wouldn't it be better to depend on blind matter than a God who puts out traps for people, invites them to sin and allows them to sin and commit crimes he could prevent, only to finally get the barbarian pleasure to punish them in an excessive way, of no use for himself, without them changing their ways and without their example preventing others from committing crimes? 69. All children are born atheists. They have no idea of God. 70. How could the human mind progress while tormented with frightful phantoms and guided by men interested in perpetuating its ignorance and fears? Man has been forced to vegetate in his primitive stupidity. He has been taught stories about invisible powers upon whom his happiness was supposed to depend, occupied solely by his fears and by unintelligible reveries. He has always been at the mercy of priests, who have reserved to themselves the right of thinking for him and of directing his actions. 71. All religious notions are uniformly founded on authority. All the religions of the world forbid examination and are not disposed that men should reason upon them. 72. The Jehovah of the Jews is a suspicious tyrant who breathes nothing but blood, murder, and carnage, and who demands that they should nourish him with the vapors of animals. The Jupiter of the pagans is a lascivious monster. The Moloch of the Phoenicians is a cannibal. The pure mind of the Christians resolved, in order to appease his fury, to crucify his own son. The savage god of the Mexicans cannot be satisfied without thousands of mortals which are immolated to his sanguinary appetite. 73. If the ignorance of nature gave birth to gods, the knowledge of nature is calculated to destroy them. 74. It is only by dispelling the clouds and phantoms of religion that we shall discover truth, reason, and morality. 75. When we examine the opinions of men, we find that nothing is more uncommon than common sense, or in other words, they lack judgment to discover plain truths, or to reject absurdities and palpable contradictions. 76. No. Tolerance and freedom of thought are the veritable antidotes to religious fanaticism. 77. Suns are extinguished or become corrupted. Planets perish and scatter across the wastes of the sky. Other suns are kindled. New planets form to make their revolutions or describe new orbits. And man, an infinitely minute part of a globe, which itself is only an imperceptible point in the immense whole, believes that the universe is made for himself. 78. Savage and furious nations perpetually at war adore, under diverse names, some god conformable to their ideas, that is to say, cruel, carnivorous, selfish, bloodthirsty. 79. The atheist destroys the chimeras which afflict the human race and so leads men back to nature to experience and to reason. 80. God, we are told, is willing to render himself inconsistent and ridiculous. To confound the curiosity of those whom we are at the same time informed, he desires to enlighten by his special grace. What must we think of a revelation which, far from teaching us anything, is calculated to darken and puzzle the clearest ideas? 81. If experience be consulted, it will be found there is no action, however abominable, that has not received the applause of some people. Parricide, the sacrifice of children, robbery, usurpation, cruelty, intolerance, prostitution, have all in their turn been licensed actions, and have been deemed laudable and meritorious deeds with some nations of the earth. Above all, religion has consecrated the most unreasonable, the most revolting customs. 82. It is thus superstition infatuates man from his infancy, fills him with vanity, and enslaves him with fanaticism. 83. The source of man's unhappiness is his ignorance of nature. Robert G. Ingersoll. 84. Then I ask myself the question, is there a supernatural power, an arbitrary mind, an enthroned God, a supreme will that sways the tides and currents of the world? To which all causes bow? I do not deny. I do not know, but I do not believe. I believe that the natural is supreme, that from the infinite chain no link can be lost or broken, that there is no supernatural power that can answer prayer, no power that worship can persuade or change, no power that cares for man. 85. Is there a God? I do not know. 86. Is man immortal? I do not know. 87. One thing I do know, and that is that neither hope nor fear, belief nor denial can change the fact. It is as it is, and it will be as it must be. 88. We can be as honest as we are ignorant. If we are, When asked what is beyond the horizon of the known, we must say that we do not know. 89. Give me the storm and tempest of thought and action rather than the dead calm of ignorance and faith. Banish me from Eden when you will, but first let me eat of the fruit of the tree of knowledge. 90. Until every soul is freely permitted to investigate every book and creed and dogma for itself, the world cannot be free. Mankind will be enslaved until there is mental grandeur enough to allow each man to have his thought and say, "This earth will be a paradise when men can, upon all these questions differ, and yet grasp each other's hands as friends." 91. The hands that help are better far than lips that pray. 92. The man who does not do his own thinking is a slave, and is a traitor to himself and to his fellow men. 93. Reason, observation, and experience, the holy trinity of science, have taught us that happiness is the only good, that the time to be happy is now, and the way to be happy is to make others so. This is enough for us. In this belief, we are content to live and die, if by any possibility the existence of a power superior to and independent of nature shall be demonstrated. There will then be time enough to kneel. Until then, let us stand erect. 94. And why does this same God tell me how to raise my children when he had to drown his? 95. The more a man knows, the more willing he is to learn. The less a man knows, the more positive he is that he knows everything. Blissful ignorance. The yoga of unknowing. Working definition of intelligence. A person who utilizes a variety of tools with which to solve a problem or puzzle or a conundrum within a relatively short period of time. Working definition of the yoga of unknowing. The word yoga is a Sanskrit term derived from yuj, which has been variously translated as yoking together, binding together, or connecting together. Thus, the yoga of unknowing is a way of uniting with that feeling of mystery, that sense of infinite luminosity, which is the natural state of all humans who are seeking to know. Nicholas of Cusa, the 15th century Roman Catholic cardinal and polymath, realized a profound truth in his studies, which he codified at the age of 39 in a remarkable Latin text entitled De Docta Ignorantia. Although well-versed in the science and theology of his day, Nicholas of Cusa understood that no matter how much knowledge he gained from reading or experience or contemplation, it would be infinitely lacking in comparison to what would remain to be known. His main thesis has an ironic import. To become educated is to learn how ignorant one really is. In today's vernacular, it Beacon stated it thusly: we are ultimately a stupid species, and the more we realize this truth, the smarter we can become. I think if we are honest to ourselves, we have an acute awareness of our own limitations. Yes, we may be knowledgeable or competent in certain areas, whether it be in fixing a car, a meal, or a mathematical equation, but in a host of other fields we find ourselves floundering in our own incompetence. This, of course, is not surprising and should be expected. But what we too often fail to realize is that even in our chosen specialties, there remains much we cannot comprehend. Given the restrictions of our cranial capacities and the boundaries of our physiological anatomies, operating as they both do within a circumscribed environmental niche, it is transparently obvious that no matter how much information we can acquire in a lifetime, it will be infinitesimal in its comparative range. Therefore, is it not the height of human folly to believe, even for a nanosecond, that our models of the universe describe reality as it is? Even though we have a tremendous advantage over other animals in trying to explain our place in the world around us, the fact remains that the limits of our language use are to a large measure the limits of how we perceive, to bastardize a famous Wittgenstein insight from his book Tractatus Logico-Philosophicus. Thomas Gray, an English poet from the 18th century, once penned, "Where ignorance is bliss, 'tis folly to be wise." Today, in the 21st century, his phrase, ignorance is bliss, has become widely used and is usually translated to mean, if you do not know about something, you do not worry about it. Each of us can recall occasions where we seemed relatively happy and at peace, only to be sunk into sorrow on learning that a loved one was injured in an accident or, worse, died unexpectedly. Here we wish that the tragedy never happened and thus we could live as we did before. But such is not life. However, there is also a deeper wisdom in the phrase ignorance is bliss, if it is capitalized and positioned differently. That is when we realize, along with Nicholas of Cusa, Socrates, Lao Tzu, Fakir Chand, and others notables, that acknowledging our unknowingness is the cornerstone to becoming wise. As Richard Feynman, the distinguished Nobel Prize-winning physicist, simply put it, I think it's much more interesting to live not knowing than to have answers which might be wrong. I don't feel frightened not knowing things by being lost in a mysterious universe. The original sin of humankind is not that the mythological beings, Adam and Eve, ate fruit from the tree of knowledge, but that we have invariably confused our neurology, our state of mind, for ontology, the real state of being, and thus consistently get tricked into believing that the maps we generate are the territory itself. Everything we mentally and intellectually generate to understand the universe we inhabit is defined by our neuronal architecture. Yes, we know much, but we never know all, and therein lies the secret. Socrates, according to Plato's account, was regarded as the wisest man in Greece precisely because he was acutely aware that he was ultimately unknowing. The Stanford Encyclopedia of Philosophy provides us with a nice summary and background behind this realization. In Plato's Apology, Socrates and his friend Chaerephon visit the oracle at Delphi. As the story goes, Chaerephon asks the oracle whether anyone is wiser than Socrates. The oracle's answer is that Socrates is the wisest person. Socrates reports that he is puzzled by this answer since so many other people in the community are well known for their extensive knowledge and wisdom, and yet Socrates claims that he lacks knowledge and wisdom. Socrates does an investigation to get to the bottom of this puzzle. He interrogates a series of politicians, poets, and craftsmen. As one would expect, Socrates' investigation reveals that those who claim to have knowledge either do not really know any of the things they claim to know, or else know far less than they proclaim to know. The most knowledgeable of the bunch, the craftsmen, know about their craft, but they claim to know things far beyond the scope of their expertise. Socrates, so we are told, neither suffers the vice of claiming to know things he does not know, nor the vice of claiming to have wisdom when he does not have wisdom. This not-knowing outlook has been described by Sharon Ryan as wisdom as epistemic humility. Nicholas of Cusa, writing centuries after Plato, explains it further. Both the precise combinations in corporeal things and the congruent relating of known to unknown surpass human reason to such an extent that Socrates seemed to himself to know nothing except that he did not know. And the very wise Solomon maintained that all things are difficult and unexplainable in words. 8. And a certain other man of divine spirit says that wisdom and the seat of understanding are hidden from the eyes of all the living. Even the very profound Aristotle, in his First Philosophy, asserts that in things most obvious by nature, such difficulty occurs for us as for a night owl which is trying to look at the sun. Therefore, if the foregoing points are true, then since the desire in us is not in vain, assuredly we desire to know that we do not know. If we can fully attain unto this knowledge of our ignorance, we will attain unto learned ignorance, for a man, even one very well versed in learning, will attain unto nothing more perfect than to be found to be most learned in the ignorance which is distinctively his. The more he knows that he is unknowing, the more learned he will be. Even the mystically inclined, such as Fakir Chand, 1886 to 1981, though a master meditator for over 70 years, came to the profound realization that despite all of his elevated experiences in samadhi, confessed, "Who knows what may happen to me at the time of death? I may enter the state of unconsciousness, enter the state of dreams, and see railway trains. How can I make a claim about my attainment of the ultimate? The truth is that I know nothing. At first, understanding our native ignorance that no matter how much knowledge we gain in our life, or lifetimes depending on your theological bent, will allow us full and 360-degree access to the deepest secrets of the multiverse can be disconcerting, but it can also be liberating if seen in the right light. How so? Instead of presuming at each turn that we are in possession of how the world really works, we can open ourselves up to the obvious fact that we still have much to learn. By doing this, we consciously seek new avenues of information, and thus our monologues become dialogues, our inviolate dogmas become partial contributions, and our resistance to being wrong turns into opportunities to change our mind. We move from unbending certainty to evolving uncertainty. Science, of course, is predicated upon this unknowing foundation, and that is why it has become such a successful and progressive enterprise, and why orthodox religions have tended to never alter course, even when their cherished myths have turned out to be less than accurate. I bring all this up as a necessary preface for practicing a yoga of unknowing. We have all done this discipline before, even if not consistently and even if unconsciously. When we were quite young, say 2 to 4, the world we inhabited was filled with unfathomable mysteries. I remember my friends and I wondering where all the water in clouds came from, how rainbows appeared, and why worms seemed to come out of nowhere after it rained. Television was a magical box, hummingbirds were divine creatures, and sparkling stars fueled our imagination. But we grew up, and some of that magic went away when we started to know the name of things, mistakenly assuming that such labeling meant that we actually knew more about it than we did. Yet, even the simplest of objects hold secrets that remain hidden from our view. As the poet Alfred Tennyson majestically wrote in 1863, "Flower in the crannied wall, I pluck you out of the crannies, I hold you here, root and all in my hand, little flower. But if I could understand what you are, root and all in all, I should know what God and man is." The flower is physics, history, biology, math, and more, all bundled up in a single gesture of nature. To fully understand all that it represents is indeed to grasp the infinite subtlety that prefigures life itself. But wholly grasp it we cannot, except as tiny granules of a much greater mosaic. In the very moment we think we know something, we realize anew that we have only touched a sliver of what is possible to be known. Niels Bohr, Einstein's longtime friend and intellectual foiling partner, understood this well when he introduced the concept of complementarity in order to grapple with the paradoxical nature of quantum mechanics. For instance, measure with confidence the momentum of an electron, and the less certain will be your measurement of its position. And vice versa, it is as if nature were a cosmic tease, where one part is revealed and the other remains concealed. The quantum realm is a game of hide and seek, with the bewitching roadblock that nothing is fully uncovered. There is a deep lesson here that, when properly implemented, can change our approach to education, and indeed to how we relate to all those we know. The belief that we know something is often a form of clutching, a contraction, and a barrier from opening ourselves up to learning more, or worse, to admitting that we may be mistaken, partly or wholly, in our understanding. The knowledge claim can be a wall of our own creation that we find impossible to scale, despite that we erected it ourselves. Think of our current politics and the immense disconnect we feel on each side about the other's point of view. Think of religion, old and new, and how many devotees feel that they have the truth, whereas other faiths are either hell-bent or destined for another round on the wheel of samsara. Now think of the current virus pandemic. Watch how differing views take up arms, both literally and figuratively, to champion their position. It is truly ironic that when we know very little, we think and act like we know much. This is the lot of humankind, and this is our sad history from time immemorial. The yoga of unknowing offers a pathway beyond this, and it doesn't have to be taught. No teachers or gurus or masters are needed. It just necessitates acknowledging moment to moment what we already intuit to be the case. We are not very smart. Yes, to be sure, we may be quite competent in some specific areas, But in other realms, we remain dutifully oblivious to what is happening. There is a wonderful bliss that can be had when we remain within that realm of not knowing, where we don't push our particular model as the be-all and end-all. When we open ourselves to counter-ideas and counter-information, even when we are secure in our ideational thinking, we relax at the core of our beings and find that our channels of communication cleared of unnecessary static. As a teacher for the past 40 years, I am keenly aware of the hazards that are inherent in my profession. We, so-called philosophers, are supposed to be the professors of knowledge, sprouting forth pearls of wisdom. But there is always a student who will know something we don't, or who can pose a question that goes beyond our expertise. How we respond in those moments reveals much I know from which I speak, because there have been several occasions in my career where I found myself reacting in ways that were counterproductive. It was when I came off flat-footed, or, more embarrassingly, when I put that same foot in my mouth, that it dawned on me that students learn more when one is transparently honest about their limitations than with striking an unnatural pose of knowingness, particularly when it is clear to be a sham. So how does the yoga of unknowing work in practical terms? First, it starts with the feeling of letting go of any absolute pretensions. By relaxing into the space of, I don't know much, and that will always be the case, then, one sinks into that sense of mystery, which is our natural condition. We came into the world not knowing, and we will leave the world not knowing. The famous line from Omar Khayyam's Rubaiyat underlines this perfectly. Myself, when young, did eagerly frequent doctor and saint, and heard great argument about it and about, but evermore came out by the same door as in I went. If we are ever in doubt about how little we know, any object will disabuse us of our arrogance. What is a piece of paper ultimately? A hierarchy of information which includes a tree, wood, molecules, atoms, neutrons, electrons, all the way down to what Sir Arthur Eddington opined was, something unknown is doing what don't know. Everything is not what it seems. If we can melt into that integrated mystery, then we imbibe that sense of awe that we had as children before we grew up thinking we knew something when we didn't. The yoga of unknowing does have a very revealing caveat. While I am confident that I don't ultimately know, I cannot then absolutely assume that nobody else does either, since that would indicate I knew more than I actually did. Sam Keen posits it in his own inimitable way when he ponders, I think we have to trust ourselves in the darkness of not knowing. The God out of which we came and into which we go is an unknown God. It's the luminosity of that darkness and that unknowing that is, I think, the most human and the most sacred place of all. A drop in the ocean doesn't know the vast expanse, except to the degree that it is part of it and is sustained by it. It is as if we are on a tall Himalayan peak looking through a telescope and seeing a million stars in the night sky. We continually tinker with our magnifying apparatus, and each time it improves, we see yet even more stars. Where once there was just a million, now there are a billion, a trillion, and so on. Such is our knowledge. The more we know, the more there is to learn. Infinity is never encompassed by that which finite. This is why Nicholas of Cusa uses geometry as a means to understand learned ignorance when he posits, the circle cannot be squared since the area of a circle is incommensurable with that of any non-circle. But these are just analogies, and all the intellectual jostling we do are less persuasive than the very feeling we get when confronted with our stupidity. How does this unknowing gut sense help us? It frees us from our own conceit, the hubris that we are possessors of hidden keys to the universe that others lack. No, we are all dumb, blind, and mute in the face of the immeasurable vastness of space and time. The yoga of unknowing is a way of waking up to what Rudolf Otto termed ganz andere and mysterium tremendum, where the numinous is all-pervasive and yet wholly other, since any vessel that tries to contain it is immediately shattered. We are those vessels, and the more we understand our limitations, what Nicholas of Cusa called our ignorance, the wiser we become as a result. The mystic mathematician also developed a unique koan, which in itself is worthy of repeated contemplation. The unattainable is attained through its unattainment. Semyon Ludwigovich Frank, the distinguished Russian philosopher, has provided us with perhaps the clearest articulation of Kusa's philosophy in his book, The Unknowable, wherein he states that human knowledge does not exhaust what remains to be known in the cosmos. Indeed, that is why we have progressive forms of knowledge and why science advances. Although there is no literary evidence that Isaac Newton said the following, it does nicely sum up our intellectual endeavors. I do not know what I may appear to the world, but to myself I seem to have been only like a boy playing on the seashore and diverting myself now and then in finding a smoother pebble or prettier shell than ordinary, while the great ocean of truth lay all undiscovered before me. On the other side of the globe, the famous Zen koan concerning tea is illustrative here and comports nicely with the yoga of unknowing. Nanin served tea. He poured his visitor's cup full and then kept on pouring. The professor watched the overflow until he no longer could restrain himself. It is overfull. No more will go in. Like this cup, Nanin said. You are full of your own opinions and speculations. How can I show you Zen unless you first empty your cup?